We'll look now at the legal requirements for trainers and assessors, and part of that involves the qualifications. But there's a lot more to the legal requirements in the current law, which is called the Standards for Registered Training Organisations, RTOs, which we're more commonly known as, 2015. So as you'll notice in your module, just scrolling down slightly, you'll come to a question and it asks you to highlight all of the correct responses. So look, they're pretty long-winded statements, so this clip is going to show you how to understand all of that. We're going to unpack all of that. So firstly, we need to understand the difference with trainers and assessors that assess in-house training. And if you can see there with A up the top, that's training where a business conducts their own training, usually by one of their own employees, on a policy or procedure that's unique to their workplace. So that's not transferable. The way that you do it in one workplace may use different equipment, may have different procedures, may even be producing a different service or product. So this is in-house, very private training, very unique. If we continue on, a qualified assessor is not needed to assess the in-house training, okay? So trainers and assessors don't need to be qualified if it's just in a private workplace creating their own training that is specifically needed for that. So continuing on, no nationally recognised qualifications for in-house training are being issued. So you can see here, this is what a nationally recognised qualification looks like. It's going to actually have a particular symbol on it. It's going to be issued by a registered training organisation, and you know that can be customised a little bit. They'll all look slightly different there, but there's certain insignia that can only be used legally by a registered training organisation that is registered with those particular courses, as we've heard before. So this is that nationally recognised qualification. I think they're all holding up their certificate for in training and assessments from Evoke, so you'll get one of these shortly, I'm sure. When it's in-house training, companies tend to produce these certificates of attendance or certificates of participation. You'll notice that there's no nationally recognised training logo on these types of certificates, unlike the nationally recognised qualifications. You can see them, yeah, just a little bit there. So the first statement is correct, if you just read through that. Let's now look at question B, and I'm sure you'll be able to read through and answer that pretty much for yourself. It's fairly self-explanatory and why that's correct. Because we were able to download those courses from training.gov.au, for Susan and for John, you will actually be able to determine that they're nationally recognised training. So in that case, yes, they can only be assessed by a qualified assessor. So number 2 is correct as well. So now we need to understand, under that third statement C, what a qualified trainer and assessor actually is. Okay? So before we know whether C is correct or not, let's go and have a look at that current legislation. Now you'll be able to double click on that embedded copy of the legislation there and quickly move through to part 2 in your own time. So basically this certificate for qualification allows you to meet all of the training and assessment requirements that are first talked about in Standard 1. So for example, you'll understand from this about industry relevance, about the learner support, and that's when the RTO actually is required to meet that, and about validation and assessment processes, which, you know, in particular you'll be getting from the qualification. For example, you're learning now about the principles of assessment, you're learning about the rules of evidence, and these are more heavily articulated in the current legislation, so it's very, very clear. It's quite nicely written. It talks also about validation activities, which this module will explain to you. So when we talk about qualifications, about qualified trainers and assessors, a great place to look then is standard 1.14 of the legislation, and that talks about things that are being phased out and also higher standards being introduced, mainly around that 2016. So I've made a little table of that in your module. And you can see pretty clearly that before 2016, you can read that yourself there, but you, as a trainer and assessor for an RTO, they might accept equivalent competency, but that ties a lot of RTOs up when they're getting audited by ASQA, and usually means that they're having some issues in maintaining their registration. So from 2016 onward, that gave assessors, considering the legislation was released in 2015, plenty of notice for trainers and assessors to update their skills and get qualified. So you will actually need the TAE 40110, and it says, or its successor. So obviously that qualification gets updated as the years go on, and you need to maintain the current version of the qualification. You can see here too, I've made a little note that if you're just assessing and you're not training, the minimum requirement for assessing nationally recognised qualifications is the assessor skill set, or its upgraded or its successor version. So let's look at C. A qualified trainer and assessor holds the minimum skill set or qualification from that training and education package. Okay, the TAE. So we know with our coding, if it's got the TAE in the front, it's from the training and education package. So until 2016, trainers and assessors can demonstrate equivalent competence. Not many RTOs really like that pathway, but yeah, you definitely know from the 1st of January 2016 that can't happen anymore. So that one is a true statement, and you can highlight that. Now the next one is a myth that we're going to bust. So once assessors are qualified in your Certificate 4 that you're doing now, or its successor, that they can assess any national recognised training. Well, no, because your qualification is only the first step. So to learn more about that, we need to go back to the legislation. Let's now look at 1.13. So in addition to the qualification, you need the vocational competencies, at least to the level. So the competencies mean that if you're training in a Certificate 4 in business admin, you at least need to have a qualification, which is the vocational competencies, to teach that qualification. You might have a diploma in business administration, and that's higher, so it's at least that Certificate 4 level if you teach at a Certificate 4 level. So you're going to have one Certificate 4 for your training and assessment, and one qualification in the actual course, at least the exact same level of qualification or higher in whichever one you're teaching. Let's give you another example. If you are teaching senior first aid, you would have a qualification in first aid, perhaps a higher qualification than that one. And you can see here with B, you must also have current industry skills. So if you were, having your Certificate 4 in training and assessment that's current, plus you've at least got your senior first aid certificate, you would, under 1.13b, also need to be the first aid officer in your workplace. Okay, because then you're keeping current with, well, what equipment are they using? I can never say that word. Defibrillation? Let's not even bother. What current equipment they're using, what procedures. I know every time I do first aid, they're forever changing how many puffs to how many pumps on the chest. So, you would need to be in the current industry skills. Plus, 1.13c talks about current knowledge in vocational training. So you also now need to keep a diary of your professional development of best practices in training and assessment. So your RTOs would be sending you away to different events. So let's see how we can move through that final question. A qualified assessor and trainer must also hold the vocational competencies at least to the level being assessed. That's what we talked about. So that's if you're teaching Cert 4 Business Admin, you would need to have your Cert 4 Business Admin as well as your Cert 4 Training and Assessing. Maintain your current industry skills. If you were a first aid trainer, you'd need to be a first aid officer at your workplace. That's your current industry skills. And of course, what's left off there is maintain your professional development and stay current with, best practices in training and assessing. Okay, so let's look at the last two. Assessors with older versions of the trainer and assessor qualification can also assess without supervision? No. Remember, it's the TAE 40110 or its successor. No older ones, no superseded versions. Older versions of the trainer and assessor qualification are superseded qualifications. Assessors with older versions do not have current knowledge of legislative requirements as a trainer and assessor and therefore cannot assist without a supervising assessor. Even this is no longer allowed from 2016. So we know now that according to our table here, our simplified table, that is a correct statement.